Okay, if we're recording,
you should be right to go, Ian.
I think we can get the show on the road, eh?
Yep.
Okay, for the second time today, welcome everyone. So Colin may join us a little later, and there's an apology already from Mayor Clark, so that's fine. Confirmation of the minutes that we had on the 10th of March 2020. I've gone through them. I'm assuming all of us have. Has anyone got any issues or anything in respect of those? No?
I'll move that they be an accurate record of the meeting.
Cheers. Thanks, Ben. Do I have a seconder for those? Thanks, sir. If there's no other discussion, all those in favour? Fantastic. Carried. Business arising. I think that there's no business really arising from those at all. I think we move straight to the item for discussion, which is the 2021 draft annual business plan and budget that we have in front of us. David, do you want to speak to that to start with?
Did you have anything arising from the business, Leon?
It's just that item 5.6 as yet hasn't been addressed or hasn't been across council yet. In fact, I don't think we've even seen the minutes of this meeting. We may have. I can't remember seeing them, but certainly whether to review or not review the procurement policy hasn't been addressed as yet.
Oh, right. Well, that was that the council reviews section 3.6 and 4.4 of procurement policy. Was that right, Leon?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, yeah. And well, at this stage, you're unaware that council has reviewed that?
Council hasn't reviewed it,
Yeah.
but I'm not aware that they've actually seen these minutes.
When would they have received the minutes, David? Any idea?
Okay, so normally with the audit meetings being held roughly a week before the council meeting, they tend to go to the council meeting the week later. So that is the normal process. So without double checking that, I'd be fairly sure that would have happened because the minutes are normally done within a day or so.
Yep.
They should have gone to the March meeting then, shouldn't they, Leon? David, should have gone to the March meeting?
Yep.
Well, that might have been whether it was...
Sorry.
Yeah, sure, mate.
I wasn't there that day. I had the virus, or a virus.
A virus, not the virus.
The virus. So I may not have seen it, but certainly that the other issue hasn't been raised yet.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I don't think they did go to the March meeting. I just had a quick look, and I can't see them in the agenda.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question.
Oh, yeah, no, they are. Sorry, no, they're down here. Section 11, recommended that council receive and adopt the minutes of the meeting of the audit committee held on the 10th of March. So they did go to the council. You weren't there, Leon.
I wasn't.
But certainly there was no report or anything to address what was recommended from the audit committee.
Well,
I don't think, was there, David? I don't even know that it was really your job to bring it to the council.
I'm not entirely sure whose job it is, but I think it's correct to say that council definitely hasn't reconsidered that at this stage.
Colin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Apologies for that. Just that
That's okay.
a funeral director didn't ring at the right time. Sorry.
It's all right. And my condolences, Colin.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with that procurement, it's not up to us, I guess, to to tell how to suck eggs as far as what goes on the council agenda, but perhaps we could suggest that it gets put on the council agenda somehow or other, so that they can review it.
Yeah, look, it's a recommendation from the audit committee that happen, and
Yeah.
and the minutes have certainly been received.
Yeah.
And then that has to be actioned, and it hasn't been actioned in the April or May meeting as yet, but we've still actually got to do that whole procurement policy anyway. We haven't really picked that up since it was.
Right. Okay.
It was brought to council in December, just from memory. I'd have to go and check, but it needed more work, and it was going to be brought back, and it hasn't come back yet. So
yeah. Okay.
that's
All
where
right.
that is.
Oh well, it'll get there eventually.
COVID and me being away has been the issue at the moment.
That's okay. All right. No other matters for discussion, business arising in respect of those minutes? Anyone?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. David, back over to you if you want to speak to the matter that's really the important bit today.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to try and cover a bit of background of the budget and business plan process. So we'll start with the council position on that. So normally, well, this year we've had two special meetings / workshops. The first one to go through the more the operating side of the budget and the capital side of the budget, or the projects. And the second one was when the business plan document, the draft of that was provided. So the intent of our originally set timeline was that the budget process would conclude with the adoption in June. The past couple of years it's been the June meeting. This year, the way the consultation falls, it will finish after that June meeting. So we are expecting to have a special meeting later in June just for looking at the budget and the rates. And obviously this meeting is part of our legislative requirement for the audit committee to review the budget and business plan and provide any relevant comment. If there were some changes suggested by the audit committee, then the council would have to have another special meeting to consider those changes before consultation commences. If this committee does not recommend any significant changes, if it's just a few typos in the document, then we are okay to proceed with consultation phase from after this meeting, once we get an advert in the paper.
Yep.
Okay, so the budget in itself is essentially owned by the elected members. They have the opportunity to change the content. Of course, management prepare it in the first phase and present a draft for them to consider. So that's what's been done in those previous two meetings. They can also look at what type of parameters they want to set with the key financial indicators, and if they are still happy with those based on what we said in the long-term financial plan. Now we have an expected rate increase in the current draft of 2.6% plus 0.5% growth. 0.5% growth is our normal average allowance of growth, and our always in previous years it's been pretty close to the mark of actual new development across the council in terms of new housing, new hay sheds, that type of stuff. So so this draft budget has been prepared very consistent with the long-term financial plan and asset spending requirements of the asset management plans. So in terms of comparing those two, the expenditure in the draft budget we're looking at 11,936,000 compared to 11,960,000. So it's only 44,000 different in the operating expenditure. 24,000, sorry. The income level, 12,306,000 compared to 12,293,000, so a difference of 13,000. And a surplus position of 370,000 compared to the long-term plan of 333,000, so 37,000 better off. So those numbers are all pretty close.
Yeah.
In terms of the financial indicators, operating surplus ratio, long-term plan was 4%. This draft budget's 4%, so the same.
Yep.
Net financial liabilities ratio, 76% in the long-term plan and 76% in this draft budget. And the asset renewal funding ratio, 110% in the long-term plan and 103% in this document. The capital spending totals are very similar. It's just a slight change to the mix of renewal to new once we've analysed the actual projects in this year's program. So that can happen from time to time, but in terms of the, we're still in the target range of our renewal spending, but just a slightly different mix to what was in the long-term plan. Total proposed expenditure, which is the operating and the capital expenditure, is around $18 million, but that does include depreciation of $4.9 million.
Yep.
The variance compared to last year to this year's draft budget on the operating expenses is a figure of around 2% variance, which is 242,000 additional expenditure. On the income side, that's an extra 170,000 or 1.4%. There's obviously some differences there with grant figures, which you normally expect that to be a little bit greater difference. So
Yeah.
And when you look at the operating expenses minus the depreciation, the difference is 150,000. So up from 6.86 million to just over 7 million, or 2.2. Staffing numbers are fairly similar to the previous year. Capital expenditure total, 6.09 million. And we can drill into those in the paperwork if we wish. We'll obviously split up the capital into the categories of buildings, CWMS, public open space, civil, stormwater, plant and equipment, and office IT type items. Perhaps just one key change. Our fuel expenses in the budget have reduced by 110,000 just in the next year based on our forecast of change in fuel prices. We've also got expected to have an additional 200,000 of road to recovery drought funding next year, but that is actually not included in the draft budget at this stage. CPI numbers for the March quarter, 2.4%.
Mm.
The local government price index, the last time we checked into that, we still only had the year till the end of December, which was 2.1%. That sort of covers all I wanted to initially say in terms of just some of those key overviews of the budget and business plan.
Members, do we have any comments at this stage in respect of what we have before us, and in fact on what David has been telling us? Jim, have you got any comments in respect of any of that? Or anyone?
Yeah, my looking at it, I thought that it was a responsible budget. You know, it seemed to me, considering the situation that we're in. You know, no increases in fees and a restrained increase in revenue raising. You know, the rates revenue raising. It's also addressing the long-term debt problem. So to me, it sort of hit the right spot for what I considered to be, you know, the broader context. I had a couple of minor points, but none of them are deal breakers. You know, none of them are significant enough for me to say I've got a problem. One was just for example, on page 19, there's a pie chart that shows administration at 21% of expenditure. And I just said to David, I've spoken to David this morning and said to him, that looks a bit high, but I could also see that it included NRM, levy, and some other expenses that most other businesses wouldn't face. And so I just wondered whether it would be worth explaining that. You'd expect admin to come in at, for a simple business, around 12%, for a complex business like a council, maybe 15, 16%. Ian, you'd probably know better than me what that kind of result should be. But and so I just said, well, maybe that needs some explanation because it looks a bit soft as a figure.
Yeah. I think my two bobs worth is that, and I had a discussion with David about this sometime earlier, and I agree with the thinking of council that that there should be a rates increase. Some councils that I'm aware of and that I know very well have not had any rates increase at all. And once you get on that particular treadmill, it's a pretty hard one to get off. And I think in the papers that we have here, David, I think it's actually shown the effect of what would happen. And it runs into the millions. If you're starting from a low base, even if you start doing your increases from there, you could wind yourself, you know, you could wind up actually having to do major rates increases down the track when people, when you know, could really expect to get some pushback from ratepayers. So the idea of actually a steady as she goes rate increase, which is no different from previously, to me is a good way to go. Otherwise, yeah, I think there could be trouble down the track without any doubt at all. Any comments in respect to that? Those thoughts?
Well, Ian, that figure you talk about, so if the rate increase was only the essentially the change in half percent growth, so if we took out 2.6% over the 10 years of the long-term plan, $2.1 million, it's
yeah,
it certainly adds up.
Sure does. Sure does. Any other comments at this stage in respect of any aspect of this?
Well, I mean, from a councillor's point of view, we've actually spent a couple of meetings looking at this, so we've probably done most of our commenting already, and there is some proposed changes that may happen before the adoption of the budget, but they're not significant. They're just small things that people are concerned about that haven't been fully addressed yet. So, but it's not significant.
So what's the general feeling of council at this stage that subject to our review giving it a tick, that will go out to public consultation fairly soon? Is that the thinking,
Yeah,
Colin?
look, yeah, that's the motion that I moved at the council meeting on Tuesday, that subject to the audit committee having a look at it, that it would go out to public consultation, yeah.
Yeah. What sort of date have you got on that, David?
Yeah, so it's basically once we can get an ad in the paper, which is requirement in the Act, and so that would commence next Wednesday and run for the 3-week period, ending, I think it's about the 17th of June is when the 3 weeks conclude.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. I think it's a very responsible budget and a good document, and it's and a credit to those who have prepared it. It really does give it to us in words of one syllable. I think it works extremely well. I'm assuming that, as always, you're going to get the usual people in the community who are going to have something to put their 2 bobs worth in, but that's what you have a democracy for, I guess. Do we have any other comments in respect of this at this stage? Okay, so are we looking at the draft annual business plan and the budget, aren't we? So we've really sort of we're looking at the business plan now as a part of this, David, or are we adopting the whole lot, or what are we doing at this stage?
Yes, it's both. Yep, they both tie in together.
Yep.
So yeah, if there's questions in the business plan or the budget, most welcome.
Yeah. I've gone through the business plan, and yeah, you're right. They're in lockstep. So I've got I have no questions in respect of the business plan or the budget, or as a combined document. Really, I've got no questions at all. But I'll leave it open to anyone else who wishes to make comments, even if they're not questions but comments regarding this. And I'll just leave it open to the meeting right now for anyone who wishes to comment. Because if there aren't any, this is going to be a real short meeting.
What we like. To the point.
I can perhaps add just a couple of extra things that we haven't touched.
Yep.
So this business plan included information from Council's new strategic plan, which has been done since this draft and the previous year's business plan. So I think it was referred to as maybe September that was adopted. So those goals and objectives have flowed into this document. The other thing is in April, in terms of the impacts on townships of the rate increase, I've put an information report to council that we have seen some fluctuations in valuations across towns that could have a bit of a concern. It's not something we can control, but we have had some towns with decreases in valuations and some that have stayed the same. So although on average we have a expected 2.6% increase, that will vary between towns. And we've only done some early modelling at this stage, and that is going to be what happens. But unfortunately, it's not something that we can control. It's probably just more a long-term reflection or correction of the market, that in previous years, some towns have copped more of the increase because their values have been going up, and now those values have settled back down again. So in effect, there could be some towns with a higher increase this year, but overall their rates will still be less than other towns due to the actual value of the properties. So.
I understand that the VG was actually going to do fresh valuations for the whole state sometime this year, which has now been put on hold. Obviously, Colin, have you got any mail on that as to when that's likely to happen now?
David, he followed some stuff up on that. You want to tell him exactly what you got, David?
Yeah, so I did hear around the traps that some councils with a zero increase, perhaps the metropolitan area, had mentioned that they were not actually getting a change to their valuations from the Valuer General, and whereas we'd already received our draft valuations for the year. So I did follow that up. It turns out there is a program of revaluing sort of the greater metropolitan area in terms of like a long-term shift in how they're valuing over a 3-year period, and that is the program that's being put on hold, whereas their normal annual valuations that go to all councils have continued as usual, and that's what we rely on and have received. So unfortunately, we're stuck with what they've given us, and there's no way legally we can not use those values.
Obviously that's a work in progress, David. That yours isn't inscribed in stone yet, though, is it? Or is it?
Yep. So we have no choice but to adopt the updated values received from the Valuer General's department.
Right. When did you receive that, mate?
We got ours initially at some stage in March, and that's where we first noticed the differences in the towns. In the rural zones, we've got increases of somewhere from 10 to 15%, but it does seem to be consistent across the board. And of course, all that does is reduce the rate in the dollar so that they still only have 2.6% increase. So the impact, despite high values, is not as great as between the towns where you've got more variation between the towns. So, and then they have a process of doing revisits. Anything that we're not happy with on their valuations, we can ask them to relook at, as well as any new information that they've found, properties that have since completed builds and things like that. So there's these constant updates coming through every week from now up until we adopt those values.
Right. Okay.
We've lost Jim.
David, if you just note that Jim left the meeting at 2:31 for the minutes.
Yep, thank you.
I'm still here, but I can't see anyone. All mine's frozen. So I can hear you, I can't see you.
Yeah, yours hasn't been any good from day dot, Colin.
That's right. It's where I sit in the office. I think I need to relocate.
I won't comment on your IT there at the office, Colin.
Yeah, exactly. It's supposed to be all good now, but yeah.
No comment.
Yes, good's looking good.
But yeah, overall, I'm pretty impressed with this as a document, and it certainly will be
he's back at 2:34, David.
At 2:30. It'd be interesting to see what sort of feedback you get from the public over the 3 weeks that it's up there for. Are there any other questions or any comments that anyone wishes to make in respect of the draft annual business plan and budget?
No, look, I'm prepared to move the motion that's there in the recommendation.
Yeah, it's all right. I just let him wander on for a while. It's always been a bit of a mystery to me why councils don't look at their expenses more seriously, and that they just accept that there is an increase in rates that will cover everything, and not look at the operating side. You've obviously been involved in businesses. Just the first place they look is in their expenses, because they haven't got a ready-made source of income like councils do. So I'd just like your thoughts on that, because I think it's disgusting that we really just plonk a rate rise on based on non-examined expenses.
Any comments there in respect to that? I'll just sort of perhaps jump in there a bit, and that is that certainly staff costs and salaries and remuneration. If I'm sure that it's examined as to how what people you need and how many of them you need, and when it goes beyond that, then you're actually bound with what sort of rates that you're going to have to pay them. You can't, unless they're on contract, and I'm sure that most of them aren't. You've got a problem. But do you have any comment there, David, in respect to that?
Yeah, obviously, I think there is some figures in the plan around staff wage increases that are fixed as part of EB agreements or national wage cases. Generally, they're fairly close to CPI anyway. I mean, expenses obviously vary sometimes for councils in terms of the local government price index, and we have a different basket of goods from a lot of businesses. But historically, council has spent the time going through its expenses line by line. There's never been any revelations out of that process because there is a huge amount of costs which aren't variable, they're fixed costs. And I'm sure most councils would be in the same boat with that. You've probably heard similar things, Ian, at other councils.
Yeah.
Now I've lost my train of thought, sorry.
Well, I'll just help you out. There are some fixed costs, understand that, but there's also a percentage of discretionary cost in there. Not all of it perhaps tied to levels of service. So I bring that up because you're obviously tied up with a number of councils. What are others doing? Or they just take the rise and fill it up?
No, not necessarily. Most councils actually take their budget process pretty seriously. Actually, they usually look at line item by line item, because if they can make it work better for not much more money or even less, I'm sure they would, because after all, they want their stakeholders to love them, and no councils, I'm sure, to my knowledge, and I'm on 8 of them, would set things to maximise their income. The only reason they would be trying to go for larger operating surpluses would be to pay down existing debt, and also to fund non-grant funded capital acquisitions. If there's capital acquisitions, new or whatever, and that includes roads, etc., that need to be done out of their own money, obviously they have to have the funds to do it. Yep. And councils, I find that normally they have their ear to the ground. They know what capital requirements are going to have to be, because they get it back from their ratepayers and their stakeholders, and they know that they can't, preside or have a council that sits over, say, a road network which is nothing but holes. So that has to be done. I don't think councils really set out to maximise the income. What they try and do is to actually maximise the debt, the payment down of debt, and over the long term, and rather than have ratepayers down the track having to pay for the lot, they're spreading it over the period, and I think that's one way of doing it. It's a little bit like what Frydenberg is saying. You know, he said there's going to be about 3 or 4 generations going to have to pay for this last lot of what the federal government is doing. But they're even if they're not going to get the benefit of it, it's going to be a whole lot worse for them if it's not done. And so I guess really it's called sharing it a bit, and both now and in the future. And I think that's really what most councils I'm aware of and know anything about. They try and do it. They're not out to screw anyone. But the budget setting process, I think, is difficult at best, and sometimes it's almost impossible. But I understand what you're saying, Leon. But I think that I don't think it's just say, oh, we'll up that by that, and up that by that, up that by that. That's not really how it works, and I know that for a fact. But I think your point is taken. Yeah. Any other comments in respect of all that, and also what Leon said?
I think David's done an excellent job this year in suggesting that we actually supply the funds through overdraft so that we can move on those quicker if we have excess funds, whereas fixed loans are ones that we're locked into a schedule to repay. If we do have to have excess funds, well, we can't apply them. So I think that's a good move this year.
Yeah. I guess that depends on and I'm not fully familiar with the loan. They'll be through LGFA, I assume, was it, David?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the terms and conditions, and individual loans vary. Some of them are fixed and you can't make additional repayments, and some you can. So I'm not familiar with that, so I can't speak about it. But the idea of having an OD facility is great because you've got the flexibility, and you only pay for what you use, which is the way to go, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think we've been doing that for a number of years now, haven't we, David, to some extent?
Yeah, that's right. We've got $3 million in total of CAD facilities sitting there currently unused. You know, a lot of those were put back in place many years ago. So we were basically using them when our operating positions are actually deficit at year end, and we would call on those funds. And pretty much we knew as soon as our income started for the year, we could pay them off, and we really only had them for a short period at the end of the one financial year and the start of the next financial year. Our operating positions have improved past that point now where we're no longer doing that. But so now, because all our other loans from the old days were fixed, this gives us an opportunity to have a bit more variable debt and take advantage of any reserve funds that we can pay it down with, rather than have them sit there and hardly earn you know, less than 1% while fixing a loan for a bit over 2%. It certainly doesn't make sense at the moment to go that way when we don't already have other variable debt.
Mm. And to that end as well, I mean, if there was going to be a zero rate increase, and then you create the rod for your own back, and all of a sudden you're in a position not that far down the track, not long term, you're going to find yourself in difficulty actually paying down debt as and when it falls due. So that's where I think a modest rate increase, and this is modest, I think it's the same as last year's, isn't it, David? 2.6? That was the increase, I think, something like that.
It's not
It's
too,
less than last year's, I think, isn't it, David?
Yes, first, last year.
Yeah,
yeah, 3.25 last year, maybe.
Plus 0.5, 375.
I think that's where we landed, something like that.
okay. But regardless, if you had a zero increase in rates, you'd find yourself in more strife than the early settlers down the track when you start paying down debt, when it falls due.
Understand all that.
Oh, look, all you achieve is intergenerational shifting of the burden, because if you don't raise the money, you don't maintain your assets at the current levels.
Correct.
And we have just done that in the last 9 years. We've picked up a huge burden of debt that was shifted by the previous council to the current.
Yeah.
To current now, that's one, fixing up the assets. So we've done a huge backlog of resealed on our sealed roads. We're fixing up some of our halls that haven't been painted in 20 years and all the rest of it.
Mm.
And I mean, by you're keeping your rates low artificially and doing no maintenance, you don't save anything. All you do is make sure somebody else pays in the future.
And pay more too.
Well, yes, quite. You're not going to do it cheaper in 10 years than you're going to do it now.
Oh.
And maintenance is the cheapest form of looking after something. But I mean, Leon's got a point. How much we look at how productive and efficient we are. I mean, you need to do all the things we do. Now, do we do them the best that they can be done? You know, there'd be varying arguments around that, and council doesn't quite get into that detail of that management of how things happen. We don't get into the day-to-day running of things. We might make a few suggestions, some welcome, some not, but we probably make a few suggestions, but other than that, as far as the day-to-day running goes, I mean, we set a budget, we expect it to happen within that budget, and that's all we can do in some ways.
Well, that's right. I mean, and the major purpose of having a council with councillors, etc., is obviously to have policy, implement policy, and to fund it, and then you leave the management of those policies and the running of them to the council staff through the CEO, and so that's really, I mean, the council itself is the overarching body and the overarching authority, but it is required to well, not required to, but it is expected that they will not interfere with management in the running of it unless it's obvious that the management is stuffing up at the speed of light. There have been a few councils around the place where the councillors seem to think that they can go and talk to the staff because they're ordering them around, and the answer is no, you can't. You know, the council only got one staff, and that's the CEO. Everyone else is a delegate of the CEO. So anyway.
I'm going to move the recommendation, move the meeting on. But,
okay, Ben.
And I'll second that.
Thanks, Leon. All those in favour? Fantastic. Thank you, members. That's carried. And what we've just moved is that the following council approval of the 2021 draft annual business plan and budget for community consultation, subject to review by the audit committee, that the audit committee now confirms its review of these documents so that community consultation can commence. That's what we voted on.
Yeah.
And thank you for that. Thank you for that. Other business. Is there any other business at this stage, members? Deathly silence?
No, I think it'll all come up at the next meeting.
Thanks, Ben. Okay. All right. Well, gents, if that's the case, then the time is 2:50. I make it exactly. So at 2:50, I declare the meeting closed. And I look forward to meeting you on June the 11th. It'll probably be Zoom again.
Yeah, the next meeting, yeah.
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 Okay.
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 Thanks, gents.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.